Well, welcome to the part two of the introduction to our online course, Making Good Happen. I'm Dr. Robin Wood, and I'm the author of the book, Making Good Happen, Pathways to a Thriving Future. And in this online course, we're going to be talking about the 6 core capabilities we need to develop to make good happen. Well, we're going to start with seeing into the future, which requires an imaginative engagement with desirable outcomes that help rewire our brains. In stages 1 and 2 of the thrivability journey, we find that the Horizon 1 capabilities are more or less business as usual and social responsibility, and incremental innovations are the norm. In stage 3 of the thrivability journey, we find that in sustainability and people who value sustainable solutions, new ventures and alliances emerge as we move beyond extending core activities into new areas, whether they be businesses, entrepreneurial startups, large organizations, or even countries and governments. In stages 4 and 5 of the thrivability journey, net positive and thrivable, we're in the space of radical innovation, which is also the space of Horizon 3 innovations. Innovations that create viable options for our future. Now, seeing into the future is important, but unless we take action, engaging our emotions and positive motivation, we're not going to make anything happen. So the challenge here is leadership styles, each of us have a different leadership style, are very diverse and often conflicting. So given that each of us affect change in very different ways, how do we handle that? Well, let's take a look at 10 leaders that we all probably know quite well, and I'm sure you'll have some strong opinions on one or more of these leaders pictured here. Now, in the world of sustainability, we have another group of leaders, and these leaders have something in common. It's a world-centric set of values that make sustainability a priority for them. While many of them are rugged individualists, and I have the privilege of knowing a number of these leaders, they also know how to work within a pluralistic consensus. Let's take a quick look at how we can discern the 5 very different kinds of values that drive what leaders can see, feel, and do in the 5 stages of the thrivability journey. Well, we start with the opportunists and the diplomats, where we'll find business as usual. The powerful selves and the conventional order maintainers are all there in our organizations, normally at the more coal-faced, lower levels of the organization. Now, where we find sustainability and CSR emerging, we have our expert achievers. And these are your folks who've made it to the first line management, second line management, even up to the C-suite, and they have the ability to engage in an enterprising way with the opportunities that CSR and sustainability represent. However, they're still not really operating from a world-centric perspective. And when we get to the individualists, which characterizes many of the sustainability leaders we just looked at, we find there's an ability to have a pluralistic consensus and to be able to align some of the stakeholders to move in the right direction. And that's excellent, but there's only 14% of those in leadership positions at the moment, as opposed to 2/3 in the expert achiever space. So how do we move strongly and fast forward into where we need to be, into net positive and thrivable? Well, our strategists, the Paul Polmans, the Yvonne Schinglads, the other leaders that have transformed entire industries, the Ray Andersons and so on, They have developed what we might call an integrating self, which can take all of the inputs from all of the different stakeholders and not only align them, but figure out future pathways to desirable outcomes. And finally, we find truly thrivable leaders who understand global interdependence and are able to take massive swathes of humanity along with them on their journey. Now, those are integrated leaders, your individualists, strategists, and what we call alchemists. They are able to integrate all of the features that are required to make good happen and align stakeholders. So, moving on to how we touch our stakeholders and align them into coalitions, in multi-stakeholder coalitions, what are the key things we have to do? Well, first of all, we've got to be able to look outside in and understand the context of our leadership. And whether it's a business strategy or whether it's a government policy or simply your plans for the rest of your life, if you don't understand the trends and the forces that are operating in your world, you might find the going rather heavy. So, starting with context, we move on to the different ways in which we satisfy our needs, both basic and high needs. And we find that the different combinations become more complex as we go up the ladder of development. And that can often have a cost, the cost of complexity, which we need to move beyond. Next, we find that our innovative force is addressing two kinds of constraints. One is natural constraints, where we've certainly been successful in developing advanced technology to deal with climate change and the fact that we're transcending our 9 planetary boundaries at the moment. But also the man-made constraints that we find in politics and organizations where there's a lack of political or organizational will to get things done. And doing things the way we've always done will get what we've always got, right? So we need to actually be very cognizant of these outside-in forces and work intelligently with them. As importantly, we've also got to look from the inside out and the bottom up at the catalysts, the catalytic ideas, people, and events that are able to shape the kind of future we desire. And along with those catalysts, to make the kinds of connections between those ideas, people, and events that actually can really get things done. Building the relationship capital and the future glue, the social capital that helps us bring those stakeholders into alignment and move in the right direction. Now, integrated leaders, for example, Mandela, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Pope Francis, and many others, are able to unite broad swathes of humanity in their cause. They're gifted at building very broad coalitions. And it must be our top priority to swell the ranks of these integrated leaders, including you. Can you take an entire industry or an entire society in the right direction towards a thrivable future? Probably not right now, but that's one of the things we can point to and show you a way forward. So let's assume we've felt, we've seen, we've touched our vision of desired outcomes, and we've aligned our stakeholders to make that happen. How do we know how far we have to go on our thrivability journey? In defining what good looks like and how we're going to make it happen, we need to measure what difference our journey to making good happen will make. So, there are 3 key aspects to measuring our journey. Firstly, we need to have metrics that are context-based. In other words, at a minimum, will your initiative deliver outcomes within the donut, which is able to work within environmental ceilings and be above the social flaws, i.e. of the basic needs of our people, our stakeholders, in the safe and just operating space for humanity. That's in the donut right here. Secondly, since the advent of integrated multi-capital reporting in organizations, we find that we have to regenerate human, social, intellectual, natural, and manufactured capitals especially. And we have to avoid trading off the excessive returns on financial capital at the expense of the other capitals. So the question is, can you understand and measure the effect of the multi-capitals in your life and your organization? Thirdly, we need to develop synergistic business models that blend the capitals in innovative ways, so that an innovation in one capital or pathway stimulates an innovation or advance in another. The future glue that helps create and hold the synergy together is a mixture of relationship and intellectual capital. Let's not forget that those are very important in making all of this come together. Now, let's assume you've successfully seen, felt, touched, and measured your envelope of innovation. You know where the boundaries between the possible and the impossible are, and you're ready to gear up your strategic innovation capabilities. You're going to be able to reinvent yourself, your offerings, your lifestyle, your organization to make that happen. Well, so what are the typical stages on that reinvention journey? And how can this help you take better decisions and more effective action? So the first thing to note is that the bigger your organization, the more likely you are to be starting your journey on the front loop of incremental innovation, which is the stable state up here where we seek to conserve the status quo. Now, perhaps you've actually been able to spot the stimuli that are demanding change around you. And you might have done some work in terms of preparing for the change. And if you've been successful, you'll probably have hit a rigidity trap or two in the process, where people are saying, hey, I don't really want to change. They might not say exactly that, but that's what they'll mean. So how do you deal with that? Well, you've basically got to be able to trigger windows of opportunity for change. And that takes some skill. And we'll talk about that a bit more in depth in the course, and it's also covered in the book. Now, having done that, you've ended up in the release phase where you're able to navigate a transition to something new, something a bit more radical, and you're actually into the back loop of radical innovation. Now, the back loop is tricky, because new innovations are fragile and reorganizations take significant time, energy, and money. And this is where you need to build the resilience of the transformed system you'd like to see and avoid falling into the poverty trap which accompanies most new endeavors. So finally, as the new innovations take hold, you'll be able to scale up the transformed systems you've been developing and enter back into the mainstream and the profit zone. Which brings us to the sixth and final of the six capabilities needed to make good happen, scaling. Now, scaling is a very popular topic these days, but it's also full of noise. There is no one universal way to scale. And the way you scale your innovation, business model, organization, a new way of doing things, depends on your unique culture and capabilities, as well as what stage you're in on the thrivability and reinvention journeys. In stages 1 to 4 of the scaling cycle, we find incremental change again, typically the norm. While radical innovation tends to begin where major scaling and systemic change are needed in stages 5 and 6. And in fact, this is really the key place where we are able to begin to redefine the good life, systemic change. Now, systemic change is the most difficult order of change to bring about, and that's one of the reasons that you'll want to learn more on this online course. So just to recap, that's been an overview of part 2 of our introduction to the online course on Making Good Happen. I'm Dr. Robin Wood. I'd like to thank you very much for listening. We'll be launching Making Good Happen, the book, in both Copenhagen and London later this year. I hope you can join us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much for watching and listening.